Hey, welcome back. I'm Northern Marksman, and today we're going to talk about BDCs, or reticles that have bullet drop compensation built into them. We're going to talk about what they are, how to choose one that best fits your setup, and then we're going to go to the range and test it out. First off, what is a BDC? Well, a bullet drop compensating reticle has some sort of holdover feature built into it that'll help you take out the guesswork. That way, if you know the distance to your target, all you have to do is put that part of the reticle on the target and you should be pretty close. Most modern BDCs even have some sort of feature that'll help you determine the distance. Usually the why behind something is very important, and I think I'll do a deeper dive of that in a later video. But for now, let's just say BDCs are good for those who want a simple firing solution at intermediate distances. They tend to do best on things like general purpose carbines. Now, BDCs are not perfect. Usually they're designed for a specific bullet going a specific velocity, but rarely do we get things that line up perfectly like that. Even in the best case scenario, let's say a Marine firing his M16 with an ACOG. Everything should be good to go, right? Well, things like atmospherics, your temperature, elevation, wind can change the trajectory. So companies have to take a middle of the road compromise to what they think people are going to be shooting. Usually that's something like 55 grain ball going out of a 16-inch barrel. But what if we want something different? What if we want a different bullet, or go in a different velocity, or even a different caliber? I'm going to show you what you can likely expect even before buying the optic. That way you'll decide if that reticle is going to work for you or not. I will say it does require some work and can be harder to set up than a basic mill reticle, but once you determine your zero, it can be fast and accurate without referencing any sort of dope chart. First, we have to determine our bullet and our velocity. I'm going to be shooting some of my reloads. They are 77 grain Sierra Match Kings, similar to Mark 262, but mine go a little slower. I know my velocity because I've shot these through a chronograph before. If you haven't done that, you may be able to just search on Google, find some forums, and get an expected velocity of your bullet out of your barrel length. Next, we need to use a ballistic calculator. There are many out there that would make this work. And I'm just going to say Strelok Pro would make this process a lot simpler. They have a lot of reticle data already preloaded into their app. But let's say they don't have the reticle you want, or you don't want to pay $10 for an app. Personally, I use Hornady 4DOF, so that's the one we're going to use. Once you get all of your information entered in, you're going to have to pull up a drop chart for various distances, and then we're going to reference that to the reticle. Next, we need to find a reticle that can match up close enough to what we have. I chose this Primary Arms PLXC 1-8 with the ACSS Raptor 5.56 in yards. And it has this picture in the manual, so it is designed for Mark 262, but at what barrel length, what velocity, it doesn't say. Next, we need to figure out what the reticle subtensions measure. That is how far apart each yard line is from center. And then we're going to compare that to our drop chart. Some companies like the Vortex Strike Eagle include that in their manual. However, this one does not. I contacted Primary Arms and they were unable to provide that information to me. So that means we're going to have to make one big assumption. That is, the picture of the reticle on their manual is proportional to the real thing. You know when someone's taken photos of a crime scene and they put the ruler next to the object, or you see a meme that says banana for scale? That's called a fiducial, and it helps to measure. That's the same concept we're going to use here, which means the reticle of your choosing has to have some sort of known value in it. This one has mils along the side, so that's what we're going to use. If you just Google measure photo, you should find one of various websites that'll be able to do this. We're just going to choose this one. So you upload your picture, and it's going to look like this. So we'll blow it up a little bit. Over here is the mils on the side that we're going to use as our fiducial. So we want to use the entire thing. We're going to click on the center of this point to the center of this point. If you count it up, that's 10 mils. So we're going to type in 10 up here, and then we're going to measure all of this. So starting at the tip of the chevron, everything is going to be measured from here. So we're going to go from the tip to the bottom. That's 0.42. Okay, write that down. From 200 to 250, 0.42. Delete that. We'll go from the tip to the 300. That's 0.80. Okay, write that down. Then we're going to go from the tip to the 400. 1.76. Okay, write that down. And we're going to do this for this entire reticle. And eventually we should end up with something like this. This is what each offset is for this reticle from that tip of the chevron center aiming point. So out of curiosity, I started playing around with the ballistic calculator to find out what velocity that this currently lines up with. It ends up being about 2725 for a 77 grain Sierra match game. Well, I know that my rifle shoots about 2550. So in theory, my reticle would look something like this, a little more expanded. Because I'm shooting a slower bullet, it would have a little more drop. Now I get to decide where I want to line this up to kind of have the best balance of everything. Let's just say 400 yards. So if I line it up at 400, that means my impacts will be a little bit high at closer than 400, and the impacts will be a little bit low at longer than 400. So now we need to go into our ballistic calculator and find out just how much point of impact offset we have at each of these yard lines. So if we go into our app, we already have everything set up. We plugged in our muzzle velocity. Everything's good. We want to line this up at 400. So I need to adjust my 0 until this number down here in the bottom left reads 1.8. So at 100, I already know it's going to be 233 yards. So if I save that, now at 400, my come up is 1.8, which lines up with this reticle. Great. So now we find our chart, and I'm just going to do 50-yard intervals out to 800 because that's kind of what this reticle is set up to be. So with the plus and minus, that's what it would take to dial. However, we're going to essentially hold, so it's kind of in reverse. So at 200, this is telling me my rounds will hit 0.28 high, and I am at 0 at the tip of the chevron. So that means my difference, my offset, is 0.3. At 250, the reticle tells me it should be 0.4. However, my ballistic calculator says 0.1, so that's an offset of 0.3. At 300, my reticle says 0.8, but my ballistic calculator says 0.6, so that's an offset of 0.2. 400 is 1.8, that's dead on. 500 is 2.8 on the reticle, but I'm going to hit 3.2, so my point of impact is going to be 0.4 low. You keep doing that for the rest of the reticle to finish out this chart. Okay, so how many inches is each one of these offsets going to be at distance? So hopefully you all know this formula, how to range a target by measuring it with mils. If you remember from high school math and how to rearrange a formula, you can get this. We know the range, we know the size in mils, we want to find the size in inches or the offset. So if you apply this formula to each one of these distances, you get this. That means at 200, we're going to hit 2 inches high. 250, we're going to hit 2.6 high, so on and so forth. And this is where you get to decide, hey, 400 to me looks like a good compromise. I'm going to hit a little bit high up close, and then farther than 400, I'm going to hit a little bit low. Okay, awesome. Now, how do we zero this on our rifle? Well, you can pick any of these distances, 0, and apply the offset. I like to keep things simple at 100 yards. So if you continue with the ballistic calculator for 100, it says you should hit 0.8 mils high or 3 inches. So what I'm going to do is 0 at 100 with the tip of the chevron. That way they match up. And then I'm going to dial 0.8 inches up. So the rounds will impact 2.9 inches high. Hopefully you don't mind doing a little bit of math. But now that the hard part is over, let's go out to the range and put our theory to the test. Okay, so out here we're going to shoot practical targets. I chose an 8-inch circle because it's roughly the size of a human head, and we're out here at 300 yards. The other target is going to be this 12 by 20 inch torso, and it's out at 500 yards. So one way to verify that the measurements we took with that online tool are correct is to actually put it on paper. So we know that at 100 meters, 1/10 of a mil is equal to 1 centimeter. So taking that, measuring out each yard line what it should be, starting with the orange dot being 0, we'll go back to our shooting spot, and the reticle should line up perfectly. So the lines I drew ended up being pretty small, which made it hard to see through the scope and even harder to take a picture of, but you'll just have to take my word for it, it lines up pretty well. So the rifle we're shooting today is a PWS Mark 114 Alpha LT, so it's a 14 5-inch barrel, has a Surefire 5.56 mini suppressor on the end, And then the scope is the primary arms PLXC 1:8 with the 5.56 reticle in yards. So what I'm going to do is zero with my reloads, and then I'm also going to zero with Mark 262 just to compare. All right, now that we're zeroed at 100, here's our groups. The first one was my reloads. I dialed a little bit down to get this group. This is a 10-round group, ends up being about 2.5 inches. And then the factory Mark 262 ends up being about 3 inches. I didn't dial in between these two. I usually find that the factory Mark 262 always groups above 2+ inches. And then when I slow the bullet down a little bit, it tightens up the group a little bit. Okay, so we're zeroed at 100. That means point of aim is point of impact. Now we chose to line the reticles up at 400 yards. So looking at the ballistic app, it says to dial 8 clicks up at 100. So I'm going to do that now. So I want my rounds at 100 yards to be hitting 0.8 mils high. So go up 8. So I'm going to set it there, and now I'm going to forget that that thing is adjustable. Okay, so now let's shoot at 300, and I'm going to put 300 on the reticle at the 300-yard target. Next, we're going to go for the 500-yard target. So I'm just going to line up the 500-yard part of the reticle and put that dead center on the target. For the 300-yard target, I ended up holding on the right edge for wind, but otherwise I held normal elevation, and all 5 rounds ended up being pretty centered. It's a little windy out here today at the range, so I did shoot 1 sighter. Otherwise, I was 3 for 5 impacts at the 500. So this is my way of optimizing a BDC reticle for a given rifle platform. This concept should apply to all sorts of calibers and reticles out there. However, if you choose a reticle that was designed for something close to what you're using, like this case, you're going to be much better off. If you have to have a chart to remember your offsets at each yard line, you've kind of gotten away from the simplicity of what BDCs are valued for. And at that point, you're probably better off with a mil reticle. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.